Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Ingrid, and I'm the moderator for today. So I'm not going to be your MC. I'm here to introduce your MC for today. You will see me a little bit later. Please welcome on stage our MC for today, Ndomiso from Avon.
I can jump up here, right? Morning, everybody. You guys sound so cold. I thought you were out there getting mingling, getting warm. You've got a heat wave, and you're also like, morning. Are you telling me that you've literally got how many? 2, 3 more mornings left in you for the year, and then you're out of it? So I'm dual hatting today. I am both your MC and obviously the representative from Avon. So on the first part, so let me just get the camera guys in. Just sorry, give me a sec. I broke something. Nathan, I broke something. It just vibrated. Is it? Okay, if it vibrates, it's good. Oh, there we go. Okay, I promise not to touch it. Um, I'm both the MC and representative from Avon. So before I wear my MC hat, perhaps a few words on why Avon and our support for TS Foundation, and particularly today from a summit perspective. And then shortly after that, I'll come on and I'll be your MC for the day. Are we comfortable with that? Cool. So, as the Avon business, we've been around for quite some time. We are a business and a company for women. And for the longest of time, we've been really empowering women and really allowing them to unleash and bring their inner confidence out through every single bit of product that we've got. And one of the things that we realized that, the idea of empowerment is not necessarily complete in just how we do it with our products. We actually need to be in and one with our consumer and people. And so we took a very bold decision many years ago, which has evolved over years. And I term it people call it CSI, other call it corporate social responsibility. I call it corporate social justice, with the idea that we need, social justice, but driven from a corporate lens, because every bit of society and everyone in society has got a role to play. So if you talk about corporate social investment, it's an investment. Where's the return? It's all monies and figures. If you talk about corporate social responsibility, it assumes higher ground, and almost that you are not part of the problem sometimes, also not part of the solution. You have this big brother syndrome. But if you talk about corporate social justice, as a term, and why we've termed our work that we do with a number of NGOs corporate social justice, it means we're entrenched. We're a part of the solution. We also recognize where we potentially are part of the problem, and we course correct and understand the necessity of what justice is, because justice is equality and equity altogether. So, from an Avon point of view, this summit is our inaugural summit with TS Foundation. We are hoping that over the coming years, it's going to become an annual gathering. And we took a very specific stance, and although it might evolve over time, we took a very serious stance around survivor centricity, versus it being about all the other things that have been done right, or in certain instances are in the process of being done right. Making sure we've got great policy documents, a number of people can fund research. But we also chose to go into a space where it's the least picture famous moment, where we talk about survivor centricity. When we do a wonderful research paper, we come and invite media, and we can take beautiful photos and it collects dust. If we fund anything relating to policy, enablement or drafting of policy, we can get into big rooms and speak big words and be quite academic about it. But the reality is that what we see and experience as a business in our world, is that our women that we serve on a day-to-day business day are the true individuals that we need to support. I'll tell you, as a business, we've got about 180,000 representatives, majority of them, because we're still in the direct selling business. Majority of them are women. And you can almost imagine 180,000 people who have relationships with potentially another 180,000 people. So every other day, when she knocks on the door, she visits a customer, she hosts her tea party to share about the latest product we've got. Most of the time, they encounter, in one way or the other, the scourge of GBV. And so it was very important for us to make sure that we start getting closer to where we can make the most impact for 180,000 women and the 180,000 customers and plus that they have. And so that's why it was important for us to think about survivor centricity in the conversation that we're going to have here today. And also, what was important for us to look at as a business was the idea of survivor centricity. And when you think about, like I said, the 180,000 women that we've got and the customers that they service, and how close they get to the scourge of GBV, is the fact that half of them just don't know what to do with it. They just don't know how to respond. And half the time, you've got people who say, this has been my customer for the last 30 years. This has been my customer for the last 15 years, and this is what's happening, but I just don't know how to help. But they come to me and they let me know first. And so we realize that there are forgotten heroes in the process of us dealing and trying to end GBV. You know, you think about in communities. I was out in one of the community visiting some of the reps, and I happened to be in a space where they were right next to a magistrate's court. And right next to the rep, so she pulls me, she says, "Hey," this introduces me to this guy. And you almost can all see I'm very liberal and flamboyant. And there's a very older man, Yebo Baba, and he tells me he's the chief. So we end up having a conversation. And in that conversation, chatting with the local chief and on what we do and what we stand for, I also realized in that moment that half the time we're expecting people who are local community members who, by age, take on very serious and important positions in societies, but are hardly trained, are hardly informed or given the information that is necessary to also support survivors. And so, as you know, I discovered, and we had various conversations with Mara, and I said, this is the one project that made it out of the team's chat group. And we're here today, it's happening. We realized the importance of survivor centricity, but also we realized the importance of dealing and having empowerment programs for the forgotten and unsung heroes, those who come in contact with survivors at their first point of call, those who have to breathe life into pain, those who have to sit and say to survivors, you can do this, this is how you're going to overcome. And they have to find a place and dig deep in their own personal experiences of support because they just don't have the necessary and requisite information and support tools. And they're the first point of call. And chances are they are first responders. And so this whole conversation and this whole summit was sealed by one day I was driving in back from home, and there's commotion at the gate. There's what looked like an Uber driver, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going on? And I just saw a woman bleeding, and she was screaming, he's beating me, he's beating me. And my security guards, all they could do was in their guardhouse call backup. They didn't know how to intervene. They didn't know how to de escalate and even support her in that moment because she was screaming, he's beating me, he's beating me. And they like said, I just don't know what to do. I don't want to get involved. So this became very, very clear anecdotally and just through experience that we have to think about survivors, but also think of our unsung heroes, our first responders, the people we forget that they matter, and the people who actually are so integral in the fiber of society, in weaving us together, whether they make keeping us safe, or whether it's religious leaders, or whether it is, the Thursday community group, from church that go from home to home, or whether it's the Gogo who runs an ECD center unofficially because, she has to look after the community and the young ones whilst we all go out and fend for work. Those individuals are so important. And so today is really and truly about ensuring that we figure out how we get to a place where we empower them so that they can empower our survivors. Last but not least, in my opening and just setting the scene, is that being here today at the JSC is so integral and it's so pivotal for us. And it was not by chance that we're at the JSC. It's so symbolic of the opportunity South Africa has through corporates and corporate citizenry and what corporates can do. It signifies the opportunity for economic growth, empowerment, and every other thing around prosperity. But we cannot have prosperity when we do not have resilient communities. We cannot have prosperity when we do not have resilient women in communities. Because that we at Avon talk about you build a better world for a woman, you build a better world for all because she's able to multiply. I mean, we know stats out there tell us more than 51% of South African households are single income households that are run by women. So she knows how to multiply. She knows how to hold and build a society. So being here is not just being at the JSC because it's nice and fancy and a wonderful auditorium, but it's also pivotal in the significance of making sure that we get the right corporates to support the journey of survivor centricity and our unsung heroes. But more than anything, by being here today, it's also marking a very important conversation in the world of GBV because we also always think it is all about the physical abuse. Financial abuse is a very serious form of GBV, and that we almost always overlook and not think about because it's his money or he's more powerful or it's her money and she's more powerful and that's it. But we don't think about how it starts and manifests in different ways and then creates this multiplicity of crises in society. So, as Avon, this is why we're here today. This is why we support what we support. This is why we've partnered with Mara. This is why we want to build a better world for women, but also a better world for everybody because we know she's so integral in building resilient communities. So I invite all of you guys to please today engage, participate, and let's figure out how we become survivor centric. But more than anything, how do we raise the flag for our unsung heroes who always half the time are the first responders, but that just never have the right equipment or tools and know-how in how to respond. So thank you so much. I am taking off my hat as the Avon representative. If you did not ask me for a lipstick or foundation, sorry, he's gone. And so you ain't getting that. If you're looking for body lotion, I'm happy to redirect you to a representative and order through her. I think we've got a couple of brochures. Sisonke is over there. She can help you with that. Today, guys, as your MC, we're going to
Ended up and how I've landed up. But I think the most important thing to understand about me is that I used to lie a lot. I used to say things like, "Oh no, this black eye. No, I bumped into a door. No, I'm absolutely fine. Oh no, I haven't been crying. I've just got these allergies. Or thanks for your concern. No, I'm so tired. I just haven't been sleeping well. But thank you for asking. So I believe the world will not change if we do not start addressing our lie, hide, repress, and deny. And actually, this applies to humanity in general, right? We can talk about corruption, we can talk about fraud, we can talk about criminality, but for today, it is just as applicable in gender based violence. So, I was subjected to domestic violence for 10 years, and I chose to stay. And while I was staying, lie, hide, repress, and deny became my world. Every day was about lie, hide, repress, deny. Lie, hide, repress, and deny was not only something that manifested around me. The interesting thing was that people around me were also playing this lie, hide, repress, and deny game. And you know what? It was easier for them to respond to me with something like, "Oh, honey, really, you should you should close the kitchen door." Or, "Don't worry, don't think about it too much. Just go to bed early." Or, um, "Everything will be okay. You just need to have a positive attitude. That will help." And my personal favorite out of all of that was, I know I didn't notice anything. I have my headphones on all the time, so I didn't see or I didn't notice anything. And my worst is, everything happens for a reason. And when people say that, I wanted to scream. Like, really, how? How is that even helpful? When actually all I want you to do is see me. Do you realize that this one black eye on my face is one of 6 that are on my body that you can't see? And all I want you to do is stop and ask me, "I see something's going on for you. I don't know what it is, but is there anything that I can do to help you? That's all I needed. And in that moment, actually, I probably would have gone, oh, no, no, I'm fine, because lie, hide, repress, and deny, right? But you coming to me and opening that door and saying, I see you, allows me then, and it gives me permission to think about it and to go, actually, I'm not okay. And I'm really good at pretending, but thank you for asking, because actually, I'm frightened. I don't know where to go, what to do. And actually, I think I do need some help. So, everybody in this room is very well aware that GBV is a persistent worldwide problem. It's happening everywhere. And the underlying challenges about this is that it's considered a private affair, right? So either we don't see it because it's behind closed doors, or we pretend not to see it. We do this denial thing in terms of it not happening now. So let's actually look at the consequence of denial and what happens. Research from Gross and Levenstein in 1997 tells us that it's the impact of denial is not only a mental thing, it is actually literally something that happens to our bodies as well. It is a physical impact on our bodies. So this research uh, divided the participants into two groups, and they showed disturbing medical films to them. One group were invited to show all their emotions as and when they happened. The other group were invited to not show any emotions, and they measured these emotions. They measured the cardiovascular responses in our bodies. And interestingly enough, the people that hid their emotions were the ones that had hot skin, faster respiration, uh, um, faster heart rates, all those kinds of things. So, suppressed emotions actually impacts all of us. And if you think that it's okay, they can suppress their emotions, it doesn't really affect me in any way. That's not true, because it leaks out. And when we have the suppressed emotions, what happens is it leaks out in things like anger, snippiness, non participation, all the things that actually impact our community. So, denial makes things unpleasant for all of us. So, my story is a not uncommon story. There are thousands of other women out there who have been abused. I was physically, verbally, mentally, and financially abused. And what's interesting is that even my neighbors didn't say anything. Years later, I got told by them, oh, yes, no, we heard the violence, but didn't know what to do. So, didn't know what to do wasn't helpful. But actually, also, maybe it was around, well, not my business, not my problem, which is something that happens, right? My own mother. My mother, who had to look after my kids when I was supposedly getting sorted by an accident. My own mother, who had to take me to the hospital on numerous occasions. She never mentioned it once. We never had a conversation about what was going on. Had I known, first of all, what abuse really is, I really thought it was about this. I thought it was a physical thing. What I didn't realize was that it was a financial thing. He had me because I was financially reliant on him. What I didn't realize that it was verbal. Just verbal is enough for me to be abused. And actually, my career would have been different had I known what sexual harassment looked like. Had I done something then, I would be standing in a different place today. So 10 years of mental and physical abuse. And I stayed, and people ask me, why did you stay? And the answer is, I stayed because I believed that he would change. Because he kept saying, I'm so sorry, I won't do it again, I'll draw you a bath. And I believed him. I stayed because I believed in my marriage vows. For better, for worse, that's what we do. I stayed because I was tired and it was too hard to decide to leave, too hard. And I didn't have confidence and I was in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, there is no space for doing anything more. I have never been more alone in my life. People didn't actually engage with me. Interesting. In fact, they avoided me and denied that actually anything was happening at that moment. Things would have been so different if somebody had actually just chosen to connect with me, to say what's going on, instead of repressing this denial that we have. So, did you know that denial actually is one of the most common psychological defense mechanisms that we use as human beings? In an office of 50 people that I was working with at the time, there was actually only one person who dared to question my story that I had about what happened to my eye. He was the one person that said, "Really? Is that really what happened? Kitchen door again?" The rest of them, I don't know what the story was, but actually, I'm pretty sure it was not my problem, not my business, and so none of the other 49 people ever said anything to me. But here's the thing: it was their business, and it is our business. Why? Because of the cycle of violence. Have you heard of the cycle of violence? Anyone? Yes? No? So it was discovered by research done by the US Justice Department. And they took data that was revealed from their research from a heteronormative perspective. And they were the ones that actually found this cycle of violence. What they took from the data was people, and especially children, that are exposed to violence when they are young have more of a propensity to have violence when they grow up, or if they don't extend the violence, they choose violent partners. So what this means is that the cycle of violence is multi-generational. And an example of the cycle of violence, oh, is my son. When I told him that I was putting this talk together, he said to me, "Mom, use my story." And the interesting thing is that I had forgotten that he had a story because of my own self lie, hide, repress, and deny. It is hard for me to understand what my kids went through. It wasn't only about me. So, not only did he witness what happened to me and the violence that I went through, but he was subjected to it as well. And from the time of about 4 onwards, I could see, not knowing then, but he would take his younger sister and he would strangle her. And that was his way of showing frustration. He would bite other kids at school. He would shout at other kids at school. And it was from watching his father in our household and that very clear and loud message that he got, which was, "Do as I do." So it took many years of him, of psychological work and a lot of processing to actually really unravel this programming of violence, this cycle of violence. So what I want to do is he wrote something, and I want to read it to you because I think that having his words specifically is really important. He wrote, as a man of 31 now, handsome guy, I still get angry, and sometimes it borders on rage. But I've learned to recognize the signs, and I've learned to self-regulate. The biggest turning point and reminder for me is realizing that my rage doesn't help. It makes things worse. I've got tools and processes that I've learned over the years of healing, and I've managed to break the cycle of violence. The cycle of violence stops with me, and my children will not experience what I did. So the cycle of violence actually stops with us too. And we all have a duty to contribute. So how do we start? Where do we go? It actually starts with dumping this attitude of not my business, not my problem. And I'm preaching to the converted in this room. But that's really where it is. It's everybody's problem. But gender-based violence is complicated. We're going to hear about this with the panel. And so where do we start? How do we start? How does actually little old me make a difference? So I have 3 points that where we can start that all of us can do from tomorrow that will make a difference. And it's not only these people in the room, but everybody else in terms of what we can do. The first is to just take one small step. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Change the narrative and cultivate connection. So if we look at one step, if everybody took just one small step, we would make such a huge impact. So let's start with the witnesses. Witnesses, please step up and speak up. Perpetrators, step down and seek help. Victims, step sideways closer to somebody who can help you, who can listen to you without judgment. It's taking this one step away from this denial that I spoke about, this lie, hide, repress, and deny that we do. So for the very few of us, and there are many that I have come across who have not been touched by gender-based violence in all its aspects, because there are many parts of GBV. Please listen, read, learn, hear and believe survivors. And then also ask questions about their lived experiences, because the more we know, the more we understand people, the more impact that we can have. Imagine the impact if we all volunteered for a relevant organization. But some of us don't have time, so how about contributing some money to a relevant organization? Some of us also don't have money. What about just showing an act of kindness? Because that single act of kindness actually might save a life. So here's something that might shock you. And it goes against what Ndumiso said earlier. What about having kindness for the abusers and the perpetrators? Ooh, doesn't feel comfortable, right? I didn't feel that way for a very, very long time. But if you think about it, where do we start if not for where the source is? Imagine how that would make an impact. So let me give you an example, because it feels uncomfortable, right? To give perpetrators some support. My current wonderful second husband, Gavin Moffat, does men's work. And in a sharing session with men, one of the men was talking about the challenges that he had at home. And so he spoke about raising his voice. He spoke about shouting at his wife and his kids. He was overbearing. He was controlling. He was using these bullying tactics. And he also said, I've noticed the fear in my family's eyes. And Gavin said, with kindness, without judgment, gently, he only asked 3 questions. I'm going to read them to you so I get them right. He asked, do you know that verbally bullying is classed as domestic violence? And do you realize that your family is being abused by the manner in which you are treating them? And how does that make you feel? No guesses, he cried, right? He burst into tears because this man realized that he hadn't connected abuse with his behavior. He also realized and acknowledged and was quite shocked at the fact that he was carrying the weight of his father's masculinity that had come into his home, and that his home actually wasn't what he wanted it to be. Isn't that the perfect example of changing just one man and just one family just by kindness and just by non-judgment? So changing the narrative, step 2. How do we start changing the narrative when there's prejudice, when there is gender roles, when there is expectations around us? And I'm not suggesting that you go and have debates and arguments with people out there. That's not going to help at all. The invitation is to just query and just reject the things that are coming into play that support gender-based violence, patriarchy, gender norms, systemic violence in general, not only around GBV. So to change the narrative, you're invited to open your hearts and minds and believe the survivors, but also watch where violence happens and take the children away. Don't let the violence be seen by the children because of the cycle of violence. Start noticing and then become analytical about what is going on around us. Not having a not arguing, but having a conversation. Why is having a conversation about GBV important? Because when we have a conversation around the dinner table, that is when we are giving permission for people to say, I'm not okay. Or I've noticed something next door. Maybe we should talk about it. That is the way that we will slowly shift. And this is not a quick fix. This is a fix that will slowly shift things and move GBV backwards. Number 3, cultivate connection. If I had had connection, if I had somebody, first of all, to believe me, second of all, to talk to me, and to listen without judgment. Because the funny thing is, I blamed myself. I made excuses for him. Oh, shame, he's had a bad day. Oh, the kids are getting on his nerves. Oh, I must try harder. I must do things better because it is my fault. If I had somebody to question me about that, I wouldn't have gone through the heartache. I wouldn't have had to go through the therapy, and my children wouldn't have had to suffer for so long. So I can honestly say that this human connection was the one thing that got me onto the path of recovery. It is also interesting, this human connection is the place in which I found solace by helping others. And what's interesting is in doing this work, the majority of the people that I work with that address this, many of them are people who have gone through similar experiences. That is how we heal ourselves, but also how we bring this healing to society. So cultivating connection can give humankind the most reward in general. not only about gender-based violence. And it is important to understand that when we have a connection with a human being, just one-on-one connection, and when we don't see that person as less than, or a sex object, or a personal server, but a human being, then actually it's a lot harder to be violent against that human being. When we have connection, we also stop this lie, hide, repress, and deny that is happening around us. So, my story is one story with a happy ending. So, I'm glad I've got this part of my story. The one person that I mentioned who dared to question the reason I had given about my black eye, I mean, that damn kitchen cupboard was really jumping out at me so often. That one person helped me find myself. That one person helped me reconnect to my power and reconnect to who I want to be in the world. He gave me a power as a woman, and he became my second husband. Ta-da! We work together, we live together, we travel together, and we run cultivating connection programs together. He became the daddy to my children. He took them to school. He fetched them from school. He attended sports events. He's the first person that they go to when they want to hug, not me. And the thing is, he showed them a different way of being and how to be. He also taught me not to lie. I sometimes hide and deny, but lying, no, not anymore. I began this talk with telling you that I was a liar. I lied because I was too afraid to leave. I was crushed by shame. I didn't want anybody to know because there was so much shame. I was racked by guilt of what was going on around me. I also spoke about how not only did I become an expert in lying, hiding, repressing, and denying, but everybody around me was also an expert at lie, hide, repress, and deny. So, my invitation for today and for always is to remember gender based violence cannot thrive in a space where humans continuously step up and become our brothers and our sisters' keepers. When we start making a difference, when we start being curious, and when we start having conversations with one another. Gender based violence can't continue if we say this is my problem. If all of us say this is my problem rather than not my problem. So I invite you to answer these questions for yourself. In your life, has lie, hide, repress, and deny helped you? Is it helping society? And what are you going to do to help GBV? And my invitation is, don't forget to throw away that pack of lies. Thank you. So I'm going to do what Ndamiso did and change my hats. And I am now your moderator. So we have a really powerful group of panelists, and the intention for today is to have really robust conversations. So I'm going to invite the panelists up one by one. I'm going to read because I won't remember everybody in terms of their profiles. And then I will tell you a little bit more about how we're going to work and what we're going to do. So our first panelist for this morning is Professor Corne Davis Buitendag. So Corné is an associate professor at the Department of Strategic Communication at the University of Johannesburg. Her field of expertise is gender-based violence, and she has published several national and international papers on this topic in academic and industry platforms. Welcome, Corné. Thank you for being here. Our next panelist is Tanya Kun. She's a practicing attorney at her own legal firm in her hometown of Rebecca. Her career reflects a shift from property law to a life dedicated to justice advocacy against gender-based violence and societal change. And she's the CEO and trustee of the Riva Rebecca Steenkamp Foundation. Thank you for being here today. Our next panelist is Courtney Gelderblom. Courtney is representing our youth and giving us a perspective from a youth perspective. And just to take a couple of minutes to stay on that topic, having the youth on a panel like this is incredible. Both to Avon and to Tears Foundation, fantastic, because actually the youth is who are seeing stuff on the ground. The youth are the people that can open up doors in terms of how we can make a difference, and we need to hear you. So Courtney is a dynamic advocate for young voices and the fight against GBV. And I hear from Mara, she has contributed really significantly. And her activism is completed by a love of music and arts. And those two bring a different aspect in terms of how we can get the message out here. Courtney, thank you so much for joining the panel. And last but not least, Tikkie Barnard. So Tikkie is the founder and CEO of Shared Value Africa and Shift Impact Africa. A self-confessed gender equality activist and survivor, Tikkie is deeply committed to advancing gender equality and addressing GBV in the workplace and beyond. Thank you so much for joining our panel. So what is going to happen today is we've got three main areas that we would like to explore, that we're going to chat through. And how it's going to work is we're going to start with each of the panelists giving a short intro to that area. And then we're going to have a conversation in terms of that specific area. The areas that we're going to explore today together. The current state of GBV in the South African landscape. GBV legislative. When I practiced this, I couldn't even say it. So the legislative responses and implementation. And then lastly, government, private, and civil society. I'm going to open it up to the floor as well in certain after certain sections. So please, I encourage you to write down some questions. You have a notebook in the bag that you were given so that we can actually hear what is happening from the audience as well. And the other thing is we want to make this as interactive as possible. So instead of just sitting there as
systems are failing us. Okay, so I'm not going to give you a lecture, I promise. I'm just saying we don't realize how many systems are at work. And when we look at the status of gender-based violence right now, what for me is the saddest is that I know how much work is being done, how many people are involved, how many NGOs there are fighting the fight, how many activists there are, how many bodies in South Africa and globally there are, and still we don't see the numbers changing. Mm-hmm. So it is that we're not doing nothing, but the numbers are changing. So that means whatever we're doing right now, it's not enough. Or we're not doing it correctly. We're missing something. Because between the legal, the education, the scientific, the economic, the political systems, there's not a connect.
Yes.
So whatever is happening, it's not changing the bottom line. So we as South Africans need to ask, what are we going to do to change the bottom line? I always love to use this example because it's like this problem that's perpetuated through silence. I never spoke about it. I grew up in an abusive household. I was in an abusive marriage. We didn't speak about it. Why? Because who are you going to speak to? And what are you exactly going to do? And if you're going to report it to the police, what are you going to do when you get home to the perpetrator? Where are you going to go? I don't have family around. Where are you going to go? What exactly are you going to do? You're going to have to deal with the consequences when you get home until you can get out of it. So if we are not going to change something about how we're doing it, it's not going to change. And we can do something because I always use this example. When it was the World Cup in South Africa, how did we as South Africans come together? How did we put in our support? How did we raise our flags and stood together to show us as South Africans? Why can't we come and stand together to stop this gender-based violence?
Yes.
Because we know we're capable, but we're just not doing it. And that's what the status of GBV is at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. Courtney, tell us, what do you think, current state of GBV in South Africa?
Coming fresh out of high school, I can confidently say it's ignorance. GBV is a controversial topic. Schools don't want to talk about it. You know, the investors in the school are going to pull out. You're not going to get all the support that you're supposed to because it's touchy. You don't want to talk about rape because it's going to make someone uncomfortable. Or you don't want to talk about a student who is coming to school with the blue eye. Nobody asks because they don't want to get involved and cause a whole thing of parents coming to the school and, you know, the drama that comes with that. And I think that's the lay of the land now is ignorance, because as the youth, I know many of my peers don't know what GBV is. If it's not severe enough, then it's not abuse. You know, if I don't feel it, like if I don't have the black eye, if I'm not in a mental institution because of it, it's not bad enough. Like it can't be that bad if I'm waking up and it's like, okay, it's an okay day. I'm going to go to school. You know, I'm at a private school. Like it's not bad. I've got food on the table. I'll suck it up.
Yes.
Because what am I going to do? And I think that's the biggest issue currently.
Thank you. Tiki.
I think I want to start off by saying we're all here because of 16 days of activism. So that was started 33 years ago. And has anything changed since then as we sit here today? And I look out to all of us here. If 1 in 4 of us is going to experience some form of violence, be it, you know, from an economic perspective, from a violent relationship perspective, look at your sisters around you. 1 in 4 of us sitting here today. I mean, when Ingrid was speaking and I was thinking about Corné and myself, here we're sitting on the stage, 3 of us. But do you know that? We don't, because we do not speak up about gender-based violence. The stigma, and Corné and myself had many discussions in the past about the stigma attached to gender-based violence, and we to blame for it. Nobody else is to blame for it, because we are the ones that actually we judge. That's it, we judge. And that is what we do as human beings. We actually, you know, somebody walks in, and I'm thinking now about some of the stories that we had to go through. Somebody goes to a police station, you know, and the police officer will say, so what have you done? You know, and our police, and you brought it up here, is that ignorance. Education and teaching people what gender-based violence is so, so important, because we don't realize it. And I think our organization work more from a business perspective. So we focus on businesses to try and teach them what does respected work look like. Because gender-based violence does not only exist in society, it also exists in business, in the business environment as well. And the thing is that we as women, and this is what I always say, we are to blame because we do not speak up, we don't say anything. And the whole big thing for me is that if you think about gender-based violence, and from a business perspective, and I'm going to business now, is that we can add 12 trillion US dollars to the global GDP if we can accelerate gender equality in the workplace. And how, for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. And I don't know why leadership doesn't actually look at that from that perspective. But here we are today again, we're speaking to the converted, because all of us here are actually fighting to fight gender-based violence. So yeah, thank you, Ingrid.
Can I say something? Tiki, sorry, I have to agree with you, but also disagree.
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to
Good,
be doing
yeah,
this.
okay.
Because it doesn't only lie with us women that don't speak up. Ultimately, we need to look at the perpetrators. And unfortunately, most of them are men. And no offense to the current men here, but men are also victims of abuse. I acknowledge and I concede that. But it starts with the men, it starts with the perpetrator. That's where we must change because if they weren't doing it, we won't be experiencing it. So we need to address our men as much as we do our women by educating them of the rights that they have available to
So I
them.
want to stay there. I'm going to come back to you, Corné, but I actually want to stay there because this is the next question that I was going to ask, which is looking at the root causes of these issues rather than just focusing on the post-incident damage control. Where can we do better? How can we do
Well,
better?
clearly, we're not being proactive, we're being reactive.
There we go.
So we need to address the cause. So, as you said earlier, when you were speaking, that it starts with our boys, it starts with those that have been abused or have seen abuse. So we need to identify that and we need to address those issues so that we raise boys that become men that don't bully because bullying then becomes abusive behavior.
Exactly.
And we condone that bullying at the early stages.
Oh, he's
Our
just a
boys will be
boy.
boys.
Yes.
Yes, boys will be boys.
Yes.
The boy that pulls the girl's pigtails
Yes.
or whatever,
Oh,
you
he's
know.
just joking.
He likes you.
Yeah.
Don't worry, that kind of thing. So we need to focus on our youth, Courtney. We need to educate them. We need to address. It's not a topic that we must be embarrassed about.
Exactly.
It's a topic that we need to discuss, and we have to start with the boys, in my view.
Corné, you were going to make a
Yeah, you see, the problem is if we look at the systems I spoke about, what is the primary system responsible? Where does it come from? It's the family. The family as a system. So it's fine to say, Tanya, we've got to speak to the boys. The boys all had mothers. They grew up in a household. They had role models for absent. You know that 60% of children apparently born in this country don't have a father figure. You know, so we need to look at the family context. And I believe that is why we've not seen success in numbers. It's because we're not working it from the grassroots, the families themselves, because that is where this behavior is being cultivated in the families. So if we're not going to change how we are being brought up, for example, I grew up with an abusive father. My mother was a stoic, quiet figure. She accepted that behavior. That's how we grew up. We witnessed it. We were all scared. And that was normalized.
Yeah.
And then we have this whole umbrella where religion is being abused. Because what it's saying is that women must be subordinate and obedient. Look at the latest HSRC study now, indicating 7 out of 10 apparently men believe women should obey.
Mm.
So we're sitting with that problem. The whole family culture, not just the white culture, black culture, it's every culture, where there's still the subordination of women, what Tiki spoke about, the equality. The equality is not happening. So if it's not going to happen in the home, it's not going to happen anywhere else. Because all those people who go and are keeping quiet at work and not saying anything, it's still happening at home.
That actually brings me to Tiki, because you come from a business to business perspective. Give me your perspective in terms of, is there hope there that maybe can leak into the home?
Yeah, so we started what we call GBV, It's Not Okay. Corne was also part of that in 2020, where we said gender-based violence, hashtag It's Not Okay, is our movement that we started. But what we then looked at through research also that was done with UJ and with Corne, we looked at the business sector to see what is happening in the business sector. So I think the most eye-opening thing for all of us was at the time of the research about how little leadership know about what gender-based violence really is, because we think it's about physical violence. That's it, And then when we unpacked it further, we've just finished a huge project with IFC and the World Bank to try and see, from a respected work perspective, how do you get that into organizations? So for me, it's happening at work. And I'm sure even some of you, if you had to raise your voice here sitting today, we've gone through it at work. You either get bullied. Sorry, did you want to ask something?
I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah.
What I found, I'm an older woman now, so I've had quite a long and extensive work experience. And what I can say is that I find one of the things that we really need to address is the way we speak about each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Our language in society, I believe, is a great contributor to how people behave and how they treat each other. If we allow people to continue to speak in an absolutely disrespectful way about women and about victims, we will not see an improvement. If we find ourselves in public spaces where it's okay to talk negatively about women,
Yeah.
How can we possibly expect things to improve? We need to have a society where we raise young boys to speak in a respectful
There we
manner
go.
about the girls at school.
Am I seeing any
On
thumbs?
social media,
Media.
what do you express? On your WhatsApp groups, what do you say? And I feel unless we start young and teach boys and girls to be respectful to each other, to be kind to one another, to support one another, and say, if we want to have a successful society, if we want to have a successful country, then we need to harness everybody's best talents and best abilities. And we're only going to do that if we are supportive of each other. So
Thank you. That's
that's what I
great.
would like to
So
say.
can I just add to what
Yes,
what
please
was
do.
said there? I want to say to you, you raise something that is so important, because if we have respect for each other, we will be honest with each other. And if we're honest with each other, we will trust each other. But because we don't have respect for each other, we're not honest with each other, and therefore there's no trust in what was we were talking about here from a systemic change perspective. There's so much. We don't trust the police, we don't trust the hospitals, we don't trust the clinics, we don't trust the social worker because she's going to judge me. It's all of those things that it's like systemically, there are so many things wrong
Exactly.
that we have to fix. And
Which
it starts
brings-
with us.
Absolutely. Which brings me to Courtney, because Courtney, the thing that I'm interested in is, what do you think the older generations need to learn from the younger generations when we speak about exactly what we're speaking here?
Well, I think with the younger generations, we've definitely become a lot more accepting of like different viewpoints and kind of breaking the stereotypes of, the gay community or any of those more sensitive topics for the older generation. But I feel like the biggest thing that can be learned is that, it starts with us. And even although it's important to treats the mother. If I'm the child, I feel they get overlooked because you don't really want to get into it because they might not understand. And I take it from the perspective, I've told the story before in primary school when similar to what Tanya was saying, being bullied, and it got to the point I had bruises on my legs from how he used to trip me. And my mom said, okay, no. And she reported it, and we went to the principal. No parents were called, no nothing. He was asked why. It was, oh, because I like her. And then we were told, okay, you can go. And nothing was done. And I feel like that's where, you know, the older generation then also has a bit more of the power because they're older, they're in the positions of power.
So we can
And
do more for the youth.
yes, most
what you're saying.
definitely.
So one of the things, interestingly, as we were preparing, I'll come to you. I see you. Thank you. As we were preparing for this, one of the conversations that I was having with Mara was to say, I don't know how we're going to fill this time. What I have just realized is we now need to go to the next subject. And I want to stay where we are. So you are 100% right. We're not going to have enough time. This needs to be a full day affair. Yes.
Good morning. I think our conversations is definitely a link with a lot of things. And we know that Kone mentioned systems change, right? And we talk about the family. And in terms of family preservation, we definitely need to be proactive. We spoke about respect and trust, and it's true that men have lost respect for women and women have lost respect for men, and we need to bridge that gap. Work is definitely an extension of we spend more time at work than we do at home, and it's an extension of our context as such. And I think in terms of family preservation, the intergenerational stuff comes up all the time. And working with parents, and we talk about the youth, and we're not in terms of working from the bottom as in the roots and the sources. We need to start with this generation. And when parents are not okay, children are not going to be
There we go.
okay. And I think there we have to work with parents to be able to address what the youth are going through. Because when the family is breaking down, where do children go to? Where do they turn to for guidance? And where are their values coming from? So we need to fix that.
Thank you. Thank you. We have one space for one more comment or question, and then we're going to move on to the next.
Good morning, all. I'm Fauzia Jackson, representing 1001 Women. Yes, teaching of values in education plays a crucial part in preventing the gender-based violence. And as a facilitator of gender-based violence and also of values, the respect, the kindness, the love, and the care are most important in schools, in our community, and society. And that forms a basis of behavior change in every person. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions before we move off? There we go. Last
Okay.
question.
Hello, morning everyone. My name is Nothemba Salini. I'm one of the social workers based in one of the township schools. With my experience in the township schools is, I think as the professionals, we are failing a boy child because most of the times our programs are mainly based on the girl child. So that's where it starts, whereby the boy child feels very neglected and then it starts violent there. With the kind of experience that I've seen with the kids that I've been working with, they're coming from poor backgrounds, your squatter camps, your shacks, and whatever. And then you get us professionals who our focus is mainly on girl child. We're doing programs for a girl child. Our focus is never on a boy child. For the past 4 years that I've joined the school, there's a program that I've created where I say my focus is on a boy child, where we would get dignitary packs from social development. But I also catered for the boy child, whereby I'll remove the sanitary pad out of the pack. You should see how these kids feel welcomed and understood. So I think if we can go back to the drawing board as the professionals as well, to take the authorities and the initiative to look at the boy child and see how best can we groom that boy child, Because if we can start in an earlier age as a primary school, paying attention to a boy child, maybe somehow, some way, we can try and fix it. Because our focus is never on them, but on a girl child.
We hear some clicks for
Agreed.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're going to move on. I would love to stay on this topic, but we need to look at gender based violence and the legislative responses. You see, even Gavin's laughing at me because I can't say it. So it's important to actually just set the scene. In April 2023, the new GBV legislation came into effect. While more recently, there have been new legislations creating the National Council on Gender Based Violence, as well as the criminal law, forensic procedures, and amendment bill, all of which are powerful legislative measures. Help me the next time I have to say. While we are proud of these advancements in legislation, the questions around infrastructure and implementation remain a concern. So we're going to start here. Perfect person to start with, our resident legal person. Give us your views and overview.
I don't think this is
There
over
you
here.
go.
Without going into details of the legislation, I want to say that South Africa, we have wonderful laws, but it's not being implemented. So what's the point? We're talking about first responders, we're talking about victims going to the police, and we're talking about, unfortunately, even magistrates. I don't know if you saw last week, there was an article in the paper of a magistrate who had found a father guilty of raping his 11-year-old child, but then decided to be merciful because he's a good father. And she gave him 5 years suspended sentence. Now, how does that make sense on any level? And then I talk about somebody like Andy Kawa. She was going to be here today, but unfortunately phoned me to say that she's not well. She had to take the Minister of Police to the Constitutional Court because they did not do their job at the time when she was raped for hours on the beachfront in Quebec. So laws, yes, but there needs to be implementation and there needs to be accountability. Those that don't follow the law must be accountable. I'm talking about teachers, for instance. If you know that a child is being sexually abused, you have a legal duty, not a moral duty, a legal duty to report. It doesn't happen. We look at the Frankel 8. They had to go to the Constitutional Court to change the law. And I'm very privileged today to have Advocate Annette Hofmeyer here. We are working together on the parole laws because there also needs to be changes.
Thank
So yeah,
you.
that's my view.
Thank you. Corne, tell us.
Yes, we had this wonderful legislation that happened, like you said, and the approval of the council, the National Council. So where's the council? To date, there was supposed to be the appointment of 13 panel members, of which 7 were still going to be government, by the way. But there's no council. Where's the resources that were promised to be allocated? Anybody here who represents NGOs, Sticky, you will know where's the funding? There's no funding, there's no money. Anisa sitting there, a cause very close to my heart, the National Shelter Movement, who we'll be working with, continuing. Where's the places of safety? The budgets are being cut. So we're sitting with the laws, they don't have money. Do you know that the people who are actually doing the work, even the workers at tears, that they sometimes don't know how they're going to pay the salaries? So the people who are actually doing the work is not getting the funding for the work. Even the Commission for Gender Equality report in 2023 showed of all the billions of budget, some were spent by the National Strategic Plan, the rest, well, we know what happened there. And there is no support for the people, the NGOs who are actually doing the work. So what is the point that we have the legislation, but then the government itself cuts the funding to essential services provided by these wonderful NGOs? So the law means absolutely nothing because it's not being enforced.
Sorry, I just want to ask, to what extent do the NGOs approach places like the National Lotteries Commission for funding?
They do.
They do.
They all
Yeah,
do.
they all do.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. It depends on the submission,
Yes.
which is something else we got to talk about later. The paperwork.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I'm serious. We've never got one judgment.
Shocking.
Say that
Yeah.
again, Mara, for the people who are watching on camera. We have
Never been successful in any money from government for many diverse reasons, and we submit good submissions. It's because the criteria of the people, they might be wanting it for people points, which is the most reason that we get funding, be it hard to help abuse.
Thank you.
I'm also at an NGO in Klipsburg West Family Center, where they were not funded for almost a year with a staff of 50.
Wow.
Where those caregivers are teaching gender-based violence to the community, HIV/AIDS, ECD training. So we haven't been funded. The funding came in about now a month ago. So a few of those caregivers and workers were called back. They were unemployed for almost a year. We do apply to lottery, overseas, USA, and also around South Africa. It's also very difficult to get funding.
Yeah. I see you. Let me just finish with the panel first. I will come back to you. Celeste, I see that you're also wanting something, so I will come back to you too. But let me just finish with the panel first. Tiki, can you make some comments about legislation?
Yeah, so I just want to say we work across Africa. South Africa has got some of the best policies and legislation in place if you compare it to the rest of Africa. However, where we fall short is on the implementation side. I mean, that is the single biggest problem that we have. And I think that we sometimes the implementation lags behind the latest legislation that has been introduced. And I think the thing is, it's also about knowledge. And that's why I'm so glad that you are going to take this road trip to go and teach people what it's about. Because the thing is, we don't know. And if we don't know, we don't do anything about it. But I just want to come back to the NGO funding. That for me is something that's very close to my heart, because when I think about, as Corné just said, all of this money that's supposed to be out there, I mean, I don't know who of you belong to the GBV NSP collective. Okay, so we as people that belong to the GBV NSP collective, we supposed to rock up every month to that hour-long meeting. We've got to provide material to the GBV NSP collective, because that's how they report to our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, about the work that's been done. Nobody gets paid for it except the government officials that are in the GBV NSP collective. We have to go there for an hour. Sometimes it's 2 hours a month that you have to be there. And sometimes you're asked to prepare material as well. So you do that for free. And sometimes it's the smallest NGOs that can't afford it. You've got to pay for your own airtime because you've got to be on Zoom sometimes for 2 hours. So for me, unless governments step up and start funding our NGOs that is working on gender-based violence, we are not going to actually see the reduction in the numbers, because we also believe, last statement, that if we can accelerate gender equality in the workplace, we will see a reduction in gender-based violence, because we'll be empowered enough to leave those abusive relationships. Thank you.
Courtney, I'm going to come back to you. I want to just go to the floor on this legislative thing. Ha! I said it. and then I will come back to you. Okay.
No problem.
There was a question or a comment over here.
When we talk about accountability, the other issue with perpetrators or the issue of justice is a long-term safety of survivors. So if the perpetrator is not held accountable, their safety, they're still at risk going forward. And that's one of the biggest issues we're also seeing with survivors. And then about the funding, yes, it's particularly in Gauteng, the bulk of this year, NGOs have, and I want to use the word traumatized because people working in the sector, it's been a nightmare this year for not just in the gender-based violence sector, but all disability, child protection. Centers have been functioning with minimal staff. They've had to reduce capacity. They've had to, even some of them have closed doors, suspended services, turning victims away, and the government returned unspent funds, 554 million back to Treasury. So why are those amounts not being used for services? Survivors have lost confidence in services because they're not getting it. We're just increasing the risk over and above, our earlier discussion focused on parenting. Those are not even looked at important services in the big scheme of things. We're just looking at dealing with survivors who are running their lives. And then all those are looked at as unimportant. It's widespread intention.
It directly maps to what you were saying in terms of trust. Tanya, I'm going to come back to you, but I promised to go to Celeste first,
Okay.
and then I promised to go to Courtney. So,
So I just wanted to, about the funding, right? I want to tell you about something that happened in the Northern Cape. So I know the Northern Cape is the forgotten province. No, we are not part of Southwest Africa. It is the Northern Cape. The Northern Cape was left off the financial plans of South Africa for 5 years. NGOs closed left, right, and center because we couldn't apply for global funding, because we weren't part of South Africa, according to the government. The programs that closed were sex worker programs, rape crisis programs, interventions in family, and there's some amazing work going on in the Northern Cape because why? They had to have ingenuity to keep going. But those are people who work in the field every day for no pay. They can't access funding. We battle to access funding, the same as that is happening up here. And you know why? Because nobody wants to fund salaries. Nobody wants to fund overheads. People want to fund programs. And programs are great, but there are people running those programs. And we are expected to work for free because we are in charity. We are expected to work for free. And the fact of the matter is people burn out. They leave.
yes.
They lose faith. And sometimes they take their own lives. Because they cannot get the work done because we cannot get funding to pay for the people who work in charity. So yes, the question is, do people who work in charity deserve to be paid?
Absolutely.
And this is the problem. So the access to funding is that. And I don't think that people are aware of the fact that people who work in charity are working for nothing.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject, without changing the subject to the youth, do you want to make
I just wanted to respond to that,
Yes.
please. A topic that's very, very close to my heart is victims' rights. Because, and Advocate Tjaart Hofmeyr will also confirm that. Our view is that, or let me rather speak for myself, my view is that we all have constitutional rights, and it appears that the perpetrator's rights at all right through the whole process is almost being put above those of the victims. And this is where I can speak for Advocate Tjaart Hofmeyr and I, and that is why we are addressing the parole issues, because it's pointless. The victim goes through all that trauma, and it's a life sentence for victims. They live with the consequences for the rest of their life. So they go through the whole legal process for the perpetrator to be put in jail, and then at some point in time, the person becomes eligible to be placed on parole, and then another legal process is not followed properly. So that's very close to our hearts, and that's what we're trying to change.
If I may, while we're on the subject, because this is really important, given the high rates of re-offending among parolees and the recent tightening of sentences in GBV cases, what do you believe is needed to create meaningful change in this area?
wow.
I know it's question made for
Do
you.
we have 2 hours?
Yeah. In 5
So
minutes, go.
Okay, I'll keep
Courtney's
it.
waiting for you.
Okay, Courtney, sorry. I'll try and keep it as short as possible. It must everything starts with proper process. Obviously, as we on the topic of legislation, proper process must be followed. And then, of course, once the in our view, of course, and that is what the policies say. Once the victims have been advised of their rights, and this is the thing, education. People don't know. Victims don't know that they have a right to be present at a parole hearing. So they need to register with the department to make sure that when that person becomes eligible to be considered for placement, that they're there, that they can give their input, so that the parole board can have a proper profile when they consider that person for placement. And then, very, very important, what we feel is that when you get there, there's a profile of the offender, and in that profile is a psychologist's report plus various other reports. But that psychologist's reports, we as victims should have insight into that report so that we can consider, you've got a hand there, so that we can consider as the victims, and so that we can place correct information before the parole board. Because what happens is the parole chairman reads what he thinks or she thinks is relevant, just taking an extract, and that's the only information that we have. So there needs to be proper process. We need to know that the offender is remorseful, that they're rehabilitated, and most certainly that they don't pose a danger to society.
Corné, I'm going to come back to you. I want to go to Courtney, but I'm really interested to hear how academia can collaborate with this in terms of this environment. But let me just take a short step outside of legislation, not being fair on Courtney. So let's be fair. How do you think youth-driven initiatives can be scaled to have a greater impact on communities?
I think the youth programs, they're not in the schools. I know I haven't seen a single youth program in my schools. So they're there, but they talk about it to the adults, and then the adults must then go out and do it to their kids. But people aren't coming into the school and actually tackling and talking to the kids and having an assembly and actually looking at them directly. Because I look at the thing, not everyone is as fortunate, but I have a very supportive mom who's really like my little, she's just like, if I have a crisis, like I go to her immediately. And it's gotten to the thing where a lot of my friends are doing that. My friends are going to my mom for comfort in their, turmoil households, because there's just no support in the school. I don't feel comfortable to go to any of my teachers because they also have that kind of thing where it's like, I know we talk about it a lot. If you're a top student, you don't get the same look because you loud and you boisterous, like, oh, how can anything be wrong? And it's just a stigma in the schooling environment to not be okay, and they just don't go in there, they don't go all guns blazing where it needs to be.
Thank you. Tell us about how academia can contribute in the legislative field.
Well, obviously in the legal profession,
There
there's
we
that
go.
field,
Yeah.
but they're not often gender-based violence activists. What your role of academia at this stage is partnerships. Partner with industry, partner with NGOs, and then conduct the research. And then what we have is platforms and voices, because it's an institution, it's a body. And through that body, we can share I do, in my lectures, share information with students all the time. So we have got a larger audience, we've got more stakeholders who we can help. But interestingly enough, I must tell you, in spite of all of this, we've got a transformation unit and they have a GBV report system and so ever 10, 15 maybe reports. Stigma. Still not communicated. We're not getting there. We're not getting it right yet. So academia needs to drive the collaboration so that we can get more research and publications out, but then the implementation in industry works with partners.
Yes.
So the partners, and we've got to enable further funding for organizations such as TIAS. We can be activists because we have larger platforms and voices. And we have a VC apparently who supports women empowerment. So we're going to have a few conversations and so on about that. And that's what we can do as academia, but it's always partnerships.
Can I add something to what? Oh, I think I'm also. I want to add to what Corné was saying now, and I think we've experienced it, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this as well. And Corné, the reason why I'm bringing it up with Corné, because both of us worked. We were asked to assess a research report that was done by an organization. They couldn't publish the report because of the data. But what I want to bring up there for me is that sometimes these research organizations that put together these RFPs, they've got no idea how much things cost. And exactly coming back to you, where do you bring in the payment of the people that are actually going to go and do the work? I mean, we had to fight with this organization when they put out the second RFP. When they came to us to tell us what their budget were, we said, there's no ways that they're going to deliver this laundry list of you know what I mean, of deliverables that you have. And I sometimes think that's why our research is also not where it should be from a statistical perspective, because we don't give our researchers the right budgets to actually go and do proper research, because now we have to fit the research, you know, we've got to fit the one into the other. And I just wanted to add that because it's a huge frustration. It really is, even with the overseas ones that they have from a UK aid perspective and a what works perspective. It's really not right.
There was a comment. Can we have a roving mic? I'll come back to you. There was a comment here first, and then I'll come to you, and then I'll go to you.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Yumurai. I'm from an organization, an initiative that is still in its very embryo stage, called the Hope for Hearts Farm. But exactly a year ago, on my birthday, which was yesterday, my husband was arrested.
Happy birthday. Shame.
It was very difficult, and it still is. But let me just keep to the topic. I'm a Zimbabwean. He's a citizen. I can't get any legal aid.
Yeah.
I can't get assistance. They turn me away. They say they can't help me. So I'm sitting here, like, just trying to fight the system myself. He's a citizen. He's got his lawyers. He's all boxed up. He's sitting there in front of me, barking at me all the time. But I always wonder, with the court system, you just don't know what to do. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. You're sitting there with no assistance or anything like that. And even when the social workers are involved, they'll say to you, well, look, it doesn't look like he's abusing the children. But I can see straight up that, look, this is abuse. My sons are angry. They're always shouting. They're 5 and 7, and they're always shouting. They're angry and stuff. And I'm just trying to fight this, this legal system, on my own, with, just trying to figure out, well, what's what. It almost took me forever to get him arrested, because it's my opinion that he went and he bribed the whole
community.
Police station. I had to go to Parktown to say, help me. And that's the only way that he actually ended up even getting arrested. But I mean, you're not talking about a small person, you're talking about a director of a multinational company who's completely alienated me. I've got absolutely nothing to my name. I've got no way of doing anything or anybody to help me. But maybe in academia, maybe it needs to be made a module. I don't know, because they love it. They love going to school. They like PhDs, and and they like masters, and they want to be this, that, and the other. But maybe they need to make it a module. I don't know. But for the longest time I had to live like that because, like you said, if you're not punched or something, then then you've got nothing to say until he did assault me. But it's hard because you run to the court and you hope that it's going to be smooth sailing, but you actually realize that
It's not.
It's not.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Pass the thing back. Thank you.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but sorry, Tanya, again, you mentioned, when we started, you spoke about policy and practice and the gap there, but you also used the word process. So the Public Protector's Office issued a report on the deficiencies of processing gender-based violence cases, and that came up in our annual shelter in Daba in October as well, and Veronica Pillay presented on that. So that also would be for me, there's lots of issues around the processing of gender-based violence cases. Also the issues of unsolved cases, the percentage has dropped, and missing dockets, which is unacceptable. I also quickly want to link to the comments made about staff in NGOs not being paid, because that for me is an important issue. Staff members, including social workers, researchers, are all taxpayers, number one. Number two is a lot of them are women. So if we look at the sector, the gender-based violence and femicide sector in itself, if women become unemployed or women are not getting salaries, that only exacerbates the gender-based violence or gender inequality issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Please pass it back to the lady with the lovely earrings. There we go.
Good morning, colleagues. Tembelihle here from Sonke Gender Justice. I just had a few comments around the whole issue of legislature. I think we hail our country for the wonderful laws. And I think of recent, I saw the call to action sort of advocacy committee launched a not fit for purpose campaign. Because while the legislation is beautiful, it still has a lot of holes, especially the ones passed recently in the electioneering time that the president just signed off and didn't even consider civil society contributions, like the issue of the board of that NSP council, where half of it is government. Government can't even coordinate properly amongst themselves, but they've got the majority of the seats. And the issue of having not only just civil society, but young people in these consultative processes, and none of our contributions are taken into account. Young people continuing to be used as just tokens in these processes, and we go there into the boardrooms with whoever, and we sit there and we make our contributions, because at the end of the day, again, the intergenerational gaps there are so highlighted, because while, we are bearing the brunt of whatever GBV is happening. Young people are experiencing technology facilitated gender-based violence. We know the solutions. We go into the boardrooms, and when the act comes out, when it comes at an act point, there's nothing much you can do unless you put an amendment to it. But why sign it in the first place? And so I think there's a sort of a need for civil society again to really interrogate these laws. While we pass them and we say they're beautiful, are they practical? Do they actually respond to the needs of the people on the ground? Does it even make sense to have these kinds of things being passed and then we hail them as if they actually make sense when they don't? And so society contributions continuing to just be chucked out of the door. And we spend hours. The NSP was a beautiful document that all civil society just put together. Everybody worked so hard in it. And then there's no budget. And then the acts come out and they're absolutely nothing that we agreed on. So I think there is a need for us to really poke holes and really interrogate, is it really wonderful if it doesn't speak to the people on the ground?
Yes. Thank you. There's two more comments and then I need to move on. So can roving mic to the lady in the back over there. And then Ndomisa will come to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Iba Nomondengema and I am representative of Impact Drivers. I just want to speak from like a youth activist point of view. So I'm an HIV activist as well as a content creator. And I recently went to the UNGEI, the United Nations Girl Education Initiative, just a couple of months back, and we were actually having conversations about gender-based violence and HIV. And one of the concepts that they are bringing into action is the GTE, which is gender transformative education. And it is an approach that seeks to change harmful gender norms and promotes equality. And it also focuses on teaching students about gender issues, encouraging critical thinking, and fostering respect for all genders. So our conversations were, how can we get, you know, when we talk about ending stigma and discrimination and also addressing gender-based violence, how do we start it at like from the roots, like young people, children, our younger siblings? How do we start it? So GTE aims to address all of that because it teaches respect, it trains teachers to have approaches in a gender sensitive way, and also it adds GBV and HIV, the HIV agenda, into the curriculum in a more sensitive and humanized point of view. I also just want to talk about how I'm have unwavering passion for HIV advocacy. And we have this goal. The United Nations UNAIDS has a 2030 SDG goals to end AIDS as a health threat. But we cannot have that conversation without addressing gender-based violence. Because as South Africa carries the heavy HIV burden, it's not just flowing around. There are issues that leave women vulnerable to being infected with HIV and AIDS. So we cannot have these conversations as two separate realities. It's one and the same thing. If you want the HIV statistics in women to decrease, we must address gender-based violence. So before we talk about why are women not using the HIV preventative measures that are put out, like the PrEP oral pills? It's because when their partners see it, it's going to be a you don't trust me situation, and then you go to bed with bruises. But if we have game-changing HIV prevention measures, like these new long-acting injectables, cabotegravir or lenacapavir, women have more choices to protect themselves in a more discreet manner, because we don't know what their partners go out and do. And we have the situation in the rural communities where the husbands go out and work in the cities. They get infected with HIV and AIDS. They come back home, they don't disclose, they infect their wives, and then the wives are so scared of taking the treatment because they have to account for where they got infected with HIV, knowing well that the partner has it, and there's just like that lack of communication, and that violence is just going on. So it's not right. So I'm just saying we cannot have conversations about ending the HIV burden in South Africa without addressing gender-based violence, because women are vulnerable in so many ways.
Yeah, what you're saying, what you bring, thank you. What you bring to the fore is that it's a system, right? The whole thing is systemic, whether it comes from legislation to academia to the youth, and HIV. Ndumiso.
I don't. Oh, it's
Here
on.
we go.
I thought I'm gonna get a roving mic. No.
You don't need two mics, eh?
I want to make sure I'm amplified. No, I think my comment and thought just comes from the story which you've shared, which is really, really touching. And, I wonder, I know that there's some HR practitioners in the room, and I was just thinking from a corporate lens, what role um, human resource policies or just workplace policies play in ensuring that they also add and aid in the fight against GBV. When you think about, how systemic it can be, and when you look at, corporate South Africa, tall glass buildings, and knowing that it harbors perpetrators in there and it's a safety net for them. When you look at financial abuse, that in most instances, we gloss over it because it's the CEO or it is chairman so and so, and we don't and find terms to excuse it. What role could HR practitioners or HR practices play in ensuring that they aid in the fight against GBV? When I think about inclusivity in the workplace, and I think about all the other beautiful terms that we throw around in the boardroom, and then you look at who the person becomes outside of that. How do we make sure that those worlds come together? Because you don't leave parts of yourself at home when you get into the boardroom. You don't say, I'm leaving the perpetrator in the cupboard and I'm going in as a CEO. I go in as my holistic self. So how do we ensure that we clean up in the boardroom and ensure that if we clean up in that space and we hit them where it hurts the hardest, where the ego, sits at the table because I've got the title, I've got the big paycheck, I've got the power in the workplace. If you hit them there to ensure that in the workplace, in society, we can start driving some transformation in that space. In closing, just quickly, I'm reminded the fact that I always see the workplace as a microcosm of society, just as much as I see schools as a microcosm of society. How do we take that microcosm? How do we start dealing with it in that space and have actually real corporate citizens taking a stand against this? So if there's an HR practitioner who knows, or maybe may have ideas, this is out to you. But I just thought, above legislation, where else do we start ensuring that we've got connecting pathways?
I want to give that to Tiki, but I actually do really want to share the story because it directly relates to what I shared earlier. I will not mention the bank, but as part of one of the banks and me being involved in the banks, when I said earlier that we need to show some kindness to perpetrators and those people who are harassing, within this bank specifically, what happened is we gave permission for the corporate people that were in management to say, I'm messing up. And what happened was directors came forward and said, I need help. And that was actually done in a kind way rather than let's put these people out, name and shame them. So there are two aspects to that. And the kindness part of it is hard, but can be very powerful. Tiki, what do you say?
I want to add to what you were saying, Hendriso, is that private sector organizations, and as I say, that's the space that we work in, is that it's not just your HR practitioners, because it starts with leadership. So the thing is, who do we have to inform first about what gender-based violence is? What does bullying look like at work? What does gender-based violence look like at work? Our leadership needs to understand it. And once the leadership understands it, then we go to the next level and the next level and the next level. But it's about the policies and practices that we as organizations bring into place in our organizations to create that competitive edge that we're always talking about. So it is about business looking at that, because they've got to look at that. And that's what this Respected Work program is about that we did with the World Bank. It is about taking an organization through what are the gaps within your organization, because there are lots of gaps from a private sector perspective, because nobody's getting it right. So what you have to do is, how do you teach that respected work? How do you change your policies? How do you look at how do I feel safe to go and speak to somebody about my superior that has invited me out for lunch? You know what I mean? And I said no, and now he's being very nasty to me. So who do I go and speak to? And how do I feel safe to go and speak to somebody about that? So there are all of these different levels that organizations need to look at from a we call it respected work, because, and I think it really is very important what you're saying, because organizations needs to take up the responsibility and spend the money on the training and actually get those programs into place. Because if they don't, we are not going to, because GBV is not just a societal problem, it's a business problem as well. That's what we advocate. It's a business problem as well. So if business doesn't do something about it, the risk is far bigger when you do nothing.
Yeah. I'm going to stay here on the panel. You've got something to say, and then Cornelia, I'd like to hear what you have to say as well.
The sad reality is there's no answer. Because we have women working, and men, please, working for somebody that's their superior, that holds the financial well-being of that entire family sometimes in their hands. So that's why often women don't speak up. They don't speak out, because if they do, they could potentially lose their jobs. And having dealt with victims, they would come to me, the husband is the abuser, and they would ask for help, and I can only do what they allow me to do, which is perhaps a protection order or laying a criminal charge. And then the first question is, will he go to jail? Because if he goes to jail, my kids can't eat, I can't eat, I don't have a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
So we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to be proactive. We need to go and find out where there is no blueprint. Otherwise, we're not the only country in the world that has this astronomical figures of gender-based violence.
Yeah.
But we need to find out, we need to do research. How do we address it on ground level before it gets to the statistics where is now?
Thank you, Tony. Corné.
No, well, to what Tiki said, we're dealing with the gender equality that's not happening, right? Tiki, the latest Price Waterhouse Cooper reports, we look at that every year. If you asking Dumiso, why are we now not sitting in the leadership? Because the majority of the leadership are still male. It's a male-dominated environment. So, in other words, that leadership is not coming forward because it's not being considered a problem. So we're not going to get anywhere until we have the gender equality, until we have more women in strong leadership roles who can drive the issue. So we got to start there in the private sector. And anyway, all employees of a private sector you have there, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3, probably more likely, who are experiencing some kind of, but for every victim, there's a perpetrator. So every organization has its. So yes, we have to address the perpetrators in terms of making them understand what behavior
That's it.
constitutes gender-based violence. So there's education at all levels that have to take place. So I know that it's always been for me, especially with the issue of child rape. This perpetrator support story is like a tough one for me in terms of supporting people who rape children.
Yeah.
And you know, even in the legal system, I've seen very few studies where child rapists have ever been rehabilitated.
Yeah.
They don't become talking about the parole issue. They don't get rehabilitated. They continue. So they always pose a threat to society. So for my case, they should never get any parole.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You want to add to that?
No, I agree with you.
So do I.
Yeah. Does everyone
Absolutely.
agree?
Because statistics show that pedophiles are not rehabilitatable.
There you go. Yeah. So it's time to move on. But before we move on, I have a question for you specifically, Courtney. It's around being a young activist. How can society better support young leaders in the space? So we've spoken about HR, we've spoken about business, we've spoken about that kind of thing. What about us supporting young activists?
I think the biggest one is, getting us involved. It's quite difficult to get into a UN meeting just as an activist if you don't have someone backing you up. I can't just walk in and say, I'm passionate about this, I want to talk. It's all about who you know and connecting. And I feel like a lot of the NGOs, especially, and even the NPOs, like having more like younger people working. Because I mean, to be honest, like I don't need, well, for me personally, I don't need a salary now. I'm fresh out of high school, like I've got no responsibilities, and that's like the perfect people to get to work for you. Because what am I going to do until university starts in February? I'm going to be sitting at home and I can't do anything because I don't have an organization to back me up. So I think that's the biggest thing that people can do to support youth activists is to get them involved when they can.
Thank you. Okay, so the topic number 3 is around government, private, and civil society. And I can say all 3 of those words. So we're okay now in safe space. There is a broad recognition that GBV has significant financial, social, health, and well-being impacts on South African society. However, there is a lack of consensus on how the government, private sector, and civil society can collaborate to develop sustainable and effective programs to address the ongoing GBV crisis. So I want to start with, rather than having an open statement go, I want to pose the question specifically about what strategies do you believe could transform the fight against GBV in South Africa and help effectively reduce the current problem. So we'll start here and we'll move.
So for this topic, I have a lot to say.
Okay.
But I'll try
How
and
long
keep
have we
it
got?
An hour.
I'll try and keep it brief. Firstly, collaboration between
Yeah.
organizations, government, schools, everything. There needs to be collaboration if we want to break the cycle of abuse. But what I've for myself, I'm not even sure what to call it. I call it RISE. For victims to rise, I've broken it down in the RISE. So for the R, I have report abuse. If we don't report abuse, we won't be able to reduce the incident in now I'm like you incidences of abuse. We have to have relevant interventions that follow that reporting. There must be research as to the root cause, and then we must address those causes. Then responsibility on us all. It's been said many times, the responsibility is on all of us, not only on Gavin. Resources, Celeste. We need we need resources. We need awareness programs, but to be able to facilitate those programs, we need the money, the funding for it. We need to let society know it's a societal problem. It's not an individual problem. It's not only that victim's problem. Then my I stands for intervention. We need to have intervention strategies. The birthday girl of yesterday. Happy birthday, and I'm sorry for what you're going through. But you need somebody to intervene on your behalf. We need to create that. Studies show that violence starts early in life. It's often childhood traumas that cause, as that the lady, the social worker, that said the boy child gets left behind. We need to intervene. We need to play a pivotal role in addressing the boy child urgently, and then involved. We need to get involved. We need to get involved in each other's lives. We need to see our friend. We need to see what they're going through. Then the S I have for speak up against abuse. Break the silence. Seek help. If you're the victim, seek help. If you're the perpetrator, seek help.
Exactly.
Support. We need to support foundations. We need to support victims. And coincidentally, I also said we need to support perpetrators because we need to teach them a better way.
Yes.
Then I have support your friend, listen. And this is a big one for me. Stop victim blaming. It's not what she wore. If you're wearing a t-shirt of a rugby t-shirt, doesn't mean you're a rugby player. So please stop victim blaming. If somebody hits you with a shovel, it's violence. It's not gardening. And then my E finally, which is engage. We need to engage with stakeholders. We need to collaborate, get around the table, engage with each other, and see where we can play a vital role. We all have our talents, different talents. And if we can combine that and then encourage victims to get help, friends to be vigilant and take a stand, encourage our children to take a stand against bullying, not to be that one that takes the video that's going to be splashed on social media. Step in. Unless we teach them from a young age to step in, we're not going to make any changes. And then men need to discourage abusive behavior. If you see your friend speaking to their wife or their child in a manner that you can see is abusive, step up to the plate. enforce, the other E stands for enforce the laws. We need to enforce the laws that we have. And then my favorite all time, and that's what the Reba Rebecca Steenkamp Foundation, that's what we advocate, is education and empowerment. Unless we educate you of what your rights are, unless you know you can get a protection order, what do? You walk up to a magistrate's court, you stand in a queue, you fill in forms, but you take your evidence with you, because if you don't know that you can do that, you sit and we need to teach and empower so that people can learn to help themselves. But lastly, we can have a protection order, we can have wonderful laws, we can take the victim out of an abusive situation, we can put them in a safe house. But what then?
Yes.
That's where the problem lies, because they have nowhere to go but back.
Yes.
And we need to empower them with some form of education, some form of anything practical.
Yeah.
Teach them to sew, teach them to create their own. and I think, well, that's my strategy.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.
Corné.
I agree with everything you said, Tanya. I agree with everything you said. There's one key thing, and we have been having this frustrating conversation, Mara, all of us, funding.
Yeah.
The work needs to be funded. Without funding, we are not going to connect the dots. So, because we all know these things, we've been talking about these things for years, we've been activists for years, and we're doing great work, but it's not going to change the numbers until we get funding to do it on a larger scale. So the key for us as South Africans is to say, if we could fund, we could support the World Cup. Let's fund the cause, all of us, in whatever way we can, whether we fund it with our time, with our energy, with the money, but there is the resource needed. We're not going to do this without the funding.
Thank you.
I think an individual is obviously their most moldable when they're a child. When you're a child, you absorb everything and you take it like that's how it's supposed to be. And, I feel quite strongly about code of conduct in a school, because it teaches the people or the child, or say for me as a girl, that I will be the problem. So I can't have a skirt longer than what my arms reach down. I can't wear a tank top on a civvies day. I can't wear big earrings because it draws attention to my neck. I can't wear leggings because it accentuates my body. You immediately in a school told that there's all these rules beyond just being presentable for your school. It's all these other rules that I'm not allowed to dress a certain way because I'm going to now provoke the boys. And that to me is the biggest problem, because you're telling a young child from the beginning in grade 1 that they will be the problem. Like, you are going to experience it because of how you're presenting yourself. And I think that's the biggest problem. And the first strategy is you starting at the bottom. A child will absorb anything and take it as gospel and apply it. And you're starting there with the problem and then wanting to apply it in high school when everyone's already got their ways.
Thank you. Tiki.
How do we get government, private sector, and civil society to work together?
Yes.
I wish we had the answer. But as an organization, Shared Value Africa, we have a mantra that the power lies in the collective. So all of us here today, I mean, if what you said, Ingrid, of taking that first step to make a difference. But what I want to say as well, the power of the collective lies in us changing the language, what you were talking about. In the power of the collective, we are responsible for the education side, because when you empower somebody with information, they can make more informed decisions. So all of those things is dependent on the power of the collective. But then what sometimes happens with us as NGOs, we become competitors. You know what I mean? Instead of actually working together, we're now big competitors. So we're not going to share our data, or we're not going to share our information, or we're not going to do that. That's where the power of the collective then doesn't work anymore, because we've got to share. And that for me is where I come back to the share and the care side of it, because I think that's what the human race has forgotten, is we've forgotten to care for each other. And I really think that as NGOs as well, our work has an incredible value. So let no private sector organization ask you to do something for free. Okay? And don't say yes. I want to say that because our work has a value. Whatever we do has a value because it comes from the heart. So for me, I think that the power in the collective lies within all of us, you know, and talking about those support systems that you have. So it's about education. It is about changing the language, and it's about creating those support systems within ourselves and among ourselves as well. And forget about us being competition. We need to share.
Yeah, totally agree. There was a comment, if we could have a roving mic over there, and then we will come to 1, 2, 3.
I think as well, if we can create task teams as well, where there will be stakeholders involved, whereby you have mixed gender and age group and generation amongst those task team. Because if we can create those, it's much easier while we are still waiting for funding. Something is taking place. Because we would sit in workshops like this, educating ourselves, where there is people out there who does not get this information. Because if we can have such outreach programs within the community as well, educating the community on what we are discussing here in this room today, I think it escalates more information rather than having to wait for funding to take place. Because if we are going to wait for funding, there won't be any change that we are doing. But if we can have task teams, street committees, like in the older days where they would have street committees, having people to engage, we put the community to engage in this kind of initiatives, then we can make change.
Over there on that side. And then the lady at the back behind. No, hang on. At the back over there.
Morning, everyone. I'm Sikandar Kala. I'm a clinical psychologist by profession, but I also engage in a lot of speaking engagements, particularly related to this topic, as well as men's health, men's mental health, and masculinity. And I was recently on a panel with Mara, so I'm just going to reiterate some of the sentiments there. Because I think today we've been speaking a lot about the structural and systemic aspects of it, but there's also a deep-rooted mindset aspect to it as well.
Yes.
And also relational dynamics that play out from a mindset perspective. So I'm always unpacking hegemonic masculinity as like the predominant form of masculinity that men should subscribe to be considered real men, in whatever that means. And that's more the macho man, Marlboro man archetypes. And if you're not included, if you don't subscribe to those things, you're not included in the social landscape, and you then get ostracized and socially excluded. And I think sometimes we downplay the evolutionary component of how important being included in social groups are. And I think if we don't address that mindset component of it, it's not going to really change, regardless of what systemic and structural parameters and platforms we have in place. So that's one part of it. The other part also is, I think South Africa also has like a tale of two countries sort of undertone to it, where on social media we're very liberal and progressive leaning, but on a grassroots level in communities we still have a very traditional conservative approach to things. And that's where the relational dynamics and the masculine dynamics still play out quite a bit. And I think from a cultural perspective, other societies may have a cultural disposition that's more preference-based, but here we have one that's more prescription-based. And we prescribe specific ways of functioning culturally, and if you don't subscribe to that, you're ostracized from the space as well. So I think it's important for us to think about that. And the last point, from a relational dynamics perspective, I think it's also important we see how we fuel and precipitate and perpetuate cycles in relationships. So, for example, relational dynamics of self-awareness, self-insight. That do I have an anxious, insecure attachment style, and because of that, I need a lot of reassurance, and I push in more and more and more. But does my partner have more of an avoidant, dismissive attachment style? And the more that I lean in more for reassurance, the more my partner wants to pull away and go into stonewalling and more of a dynamic of repressing and suppressing things and being avoidant. And if you keep pushing in a particular direction, that person may feel like they pushed into a corner. And what does that elicit? So I think the sentiments of perpetrator victim have a utilitarian function, but beyond a certain point, it's not about whose fault it is, but it's our problem. And how do we
Yes.
think about resolving our problem in that landscape? So I just wanted to add those sentiments.
Thank you. If I may, while you still have the mic, because it is really nice to have a masculine input perspective. Yes, could you just give us, from your perspective and your involvement in the industry, where do you believe we could start that would make the most difference in what we've been speaking about today?
Yeah, I think earlier to the sentiment of how we raise boy children and to the sentiments of having a youth component here as well, I think curriculum needs to be looked at quite intensely. I think if we can start introducing aspects of how we look at masculinity at an early age as well. I think sometimes some of these sentiments are addressed in tertiary education. But by that time, a lot of personalities already been formed and developed, and it's quite set in stone. So if we start earlier on a basic education level side, and we start saying from a life orientation perspective, it's not only about expressing what gender-based violence awareness is, but also going deeper into how is masculinity generated, what are the hegemonic masculinity things to look out for, and even certain sort of life skills that have an element of, like I said, relational training, personality awareness. We might not all have mental health conditions, but we all have a personality. But I think we lack so much insight into personality functioning. Often when I'm giving speaking engagements and I unpack the big 5 personality traits, there's so much, intrigue in the audience, because it's like, oh, what are the big 5 personality traits? And then I go into openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. And just that in itself is so much to unpack. And if we have more self-awareness, we have more insight, we're going to start engaging in ways that are not reactionary. We'll start picking up on things before they pass a certain threshold. And that starts resulting in more preventative difference rather than reactive difference.
Lovely.
So
Thank
I
you.
think that would be very insightful.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a question at the back, and then we'll come forward. Sorry,
Good morning, my beloved panel there. I still want to go back. I want to ask, how do we help women that are not working and their husbands are sleeping with their own children? I had a neighbor, the husband was sleeping with the child. And when I said I must report it to the community, he said, no, what are we going to eat at home? The community intervened and that guy was arrested. And when he was arrested, she was shouting that, you see, now who's going to fend my kids because my husband is arrested. So on that case, I don't know really how can we help such women. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to take that question?
Yeah, you know what, coming back to the collective again as well, because Mara, you and I spoke about it, is that within our communities, something could be happening right in front of our eyes.
Yes.
And sometimes your gogo will say, no, we're not going to say that that young girl has been raped by the pastor, because, he's a well-respected man in his community, so we can't say anything. And that's where we have to rely on what you just said now. We have to rely on the community to actually speak up. If you have the trust to maybe go and speak to somebody from church, or if there's an NGO within your area to go and speak, but the community, that's where the power lies in the collective. We have to come together and the community needs to try and, you know, get him out of that household, because it happens. It really happens. I mean, we had I think it was you and me that had somebody at UJ. Also, she was a lecturer. She was actually in an abusive relationship. She went to her mother to say, I want to come home. Her mother said, no, you know, I've gone through it in my lifetime, so why can't you do it as well? So those are the mindsets that we have to shift. Talking about the mindsets, is that we have to shift from a cultural perspective. I think that sometimes we use culture as an excuse, lots of times. You know, we use religion as an excuse as well, because, you know, that's what the Bible says. But if we really unpack it, it's the way we interpret the Bible, you know, to suit us. So we really have to as a collective, we need to come together and solve something like you've been facing. But thank you for bringing that up, because
Okay.
it does happen.
Corné, do you want to, and then I'll come to Tanya.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say what Tiki's saying is right, but we need funding to support communities working together. There have been successful work in poor countries where community members take action. For example, they will not allow a perpetrator, the community will not allow that perpetrator to get into his house, to enter that community boundary. The community. So if they know a child's being raped, they would act as a community. The men in the community would say, you're not allowed back here. And I know, understand the resources, paying the food. But if communities were empowered, there could be a feeding scheme in communities. There could be growing plants or vegetation in a community. If there's funding to support community projects, one can do that, so that victims who are reliant on perpetrators can still have food and resources and be empowered to support themselves.
Tanya, you wanted to say something?
My heart goes out to that mother, and I commend the community for standing up and doing the right thing. That, I mean, that's a not negotiable. But I do understand that she doesn't have food to eat. I don't have the answer for that. I can only agree, but that's not a long term, or that's not your short term answer. I can only hope that the community that's been supporting emotionally and doing the right thing will also find it in their hearts, if they have the resources, to also help her until she can get help. But I don't think any of us really at this point have the answer, unless government steps up and funds are created to help people such as your friend. And then I want to say to the gentleman, I think that it's so important that men, they must form part of the conversation.
Oh yeah.
If men don't form part of the conversation, we're not going to achieve what we ultimately want to achieve. And that's why the boy child becomes so important. And I also collaborate with various organizations. I was at the Uyinene Foundation's 5th celebration. We called it a celebration last weekend. And their initiative was to start soccer clubs. So they've got a soccer initiative, and the Yasreel Foundation, which is the late Olivia Yasreel, that foundation, her son has taken over. And they've also started a soccer club where they're taking boys off the street, so that as opposed to them sitting at home, having nothing to do, getting into trouble, getting involved in drugs, they've taken them in, they've arranged a soccer club. And part of that soccer club is to teach those boys how to treat girls, what is right, what is wrong. So we don't have the answer. But at least, and I'm going to quote the words of Albert Einstein. He said, the world is a dangerous place, not because of people who do evil, but because of those who do nothing. I don't want to be that person who does nothing. If we can help one person, like your community did, you helped that child, but you didn't only help the child, you helped other people, other perpetrators, to see what's going to happen if they perpetrate. And we can only If we can only help one person at a time, then we've done good, because we must do better.
Totally. Thank you. I want to add to I'll come to you. Try not to comment, but it is really one thing that I do want to say. I'm part of an NPO, which is Women's Empowerment Organization. And one of the things that has struck me over the last 10 years is women have this mindset that we rely on our husbands and our men in order to live our lives the way we want to. And it is so absolutely moving to see women step into their own power and go, actually, you know what? I don't need you. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing I wanted to say is to involve men. Gavin, I will come to you because you put your hand up. But one of the things that Gavin does, which I particularly love, is that a man will make a joke and he'll say, "That's not funny." And everyone will go, "Oh, I'm just making a joke." And that's what we need more of. So, yeah. You wanted to say something, Gavin?
Well, I don't know if somebody wants to give me a microphone or...
Oh, will you? You want to, okay. We'll come back to you. Sorry.
Thank you. I tend to view this a little bit differently. I hear lots of women talking about men should be involved. I think differently. I think men should be driving this. I think that men hold all the levers of power still across the world. This needs to be driven by men. Things are not going to change if it's not driven by men. And so, having said that, I'd be interested to understand how you think that shift will take place or can take place over time, so that it stops becoming a woman's job to push this and it becomes a man's job to solve this problem. I'd be curious to know how you feel that change can be made.
Can we ask the panel that? I just want to come back to you that had a question. Managing in order to manage time, we're going to have two from the floor, and then we're going to come back to the panel.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Salwa. I actually don't have myself a question, but I've shared the link on one of our groups, and one of my colleagues actually asked me to find out from you guys. She said, Salwa, please ask the panel if emotional, mental, and financial abuse can be added to this national conversation. For argument's sake, maintenance defaulters, they get away with murder. That's a question.
Does anyone want to take that?
Absolutely. All of those forms of abuse is part of the narrative, but we don't concentrate on that enough, which is where education comes in. Unfortunately, you also mentioned it earlier. So we need to address that most certainly. And as far as maintenance is concerned, the maintenance courts, I was in Clicks the other day, and there was an interview with a guy on the radio, and the guy asked, where do I go if I want to complain against the police or the maintenance court or whatever? You send an email. I mean, that is not the answer. There must be accountability. Unfortunately, it's the courts that must enforce it, but they don't often. So that's why, again, I say education, so that you know what your rights are, and then accountability. We need to report people who don't do their jobs.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I just want to say I want to compliment all the ladies in this place. You have so much of power here. If we could just get our voice out. I just want to say I recently associated myself with Mara and represent the church. And when I heard them mentioning what the pastors, I just want to say that we have erred in the past. And I say this with the drop voice, listening to all the stories, is sometimes we speak over the people. And as a church, we have a big influence in the community, and we need to change the way we do things. To what Gavin is saying, one of our things, and I've researched it before. I was also with Mara a few weeks ago. The church needs to separate their spirituality from the legal aspect of the rights of people. And whilst we believe the Bible to be true from just that ethnic belief, we have to point the people to the police. And I don't want to get into their calamities that they face. But I think as a church, my 3 points is: one is we need to tell the people the rights. And number two, we need to understand to change the brain patterns of how people think. Um, from the fact that, one of our drives is to, again, coming back to the young boys, and not necessarily young boys, even girls, to change what they see. So we want to start a program where we're not talking about adoption, and I was talking to one of the ladies from the Tears Foundation, but to show the young boys a different way of doing things, the different mindset of how they can behave. And the biggest thing, you can hear my voice, I was like prepared. At the end of the day, there's so much of dynamics that needs to be changed, especially from our country. The fact that children don't have fathers in their homes is the biggest contribution factor. They're not seeing that example. They're not seeing that role. And heads up to the single moms, heads up to you that are here. And I hear what the lady is saying. You can't do it for nothing. Mara, I hear you. I heard Mara's cry a few weeks ago again. And whilst, the men's supposed to drive it, the ladies do all these hard works. And unfortunately, we have a governmental situation that's not looking at it. But coming back to the church, I think we have erred, and we're going to do our bit to try and educate people and train the counselors to identify a situation, not send the lady home, go and pray about it, because when you're hungry, you can't really pray. I just want to say that I want to represent the church to say we want to do something differently. Even in our South African community, the pastors are looked up to, but they really go over the people. So I just want to say you have our support from the clergy and the church to try and do something different. That we sit here in a year's time, in 2025, we shall have some good report for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on. Let's go back one back, and then we'll come to you. And then that's the last. We'll come back to the panel.
Hi everyone, I'm Mandy. I just wanted to add something in terms of education and curriculum. I studied to become a teacher, and there was nothing in our training at all in terms of the practical reporting. So in terms of the Children's Act, it's mandatory reporting, but we are clueless as teachers. And so one thing that I see, in fact, even in counseling, I think there's very little. You can go up to honors level, and in the curriculum, it's dealt with as an academic subject or topic in terms of sexual abuse, for example, but not really in terms of changing the narrative and also in terms of implementation. So one area that I see there being a huge opportunity is the CPD points that people need to get. Because all the professional bodies, it's teachers, it's psychologists, it's the HPCSA, it's the social workers, all of that need to get these continuous development points. And I believe if we can start changing the narrative there, if we can get to them, if we can train the LO teachers, if we can train the foundation teachers, if we can train the counselors in terms of practically what is required, the signs to look out, I believe that that can help drive it. It also means that they'll change the narrative with the kids that they teach, and every child is taught. So I find a lot with private organizations is they see it as an organization and there's an investment risk. And so that's quite often why stuff's sort of put under the carpet. That needs to be challenged too. But I really see a huge opportunity for CPD points.
Lovely, thank you. Last one here, and then we'll come back to the panel. All right. No, over here. Here we go.
Thanks. I wanted to make a comment to say that in leadership, I've noticed that the characteristics and the personality of the people who are driving these big companies and stuff are hard people. Are the people who sort of are perpetrators, and so it might be difficult for companies to come and say, well, to call them out because they're bringing in the cash, they're bringing in the results, sort of thing. So that I think is something that needs to be looked at by, I guess, educating them in an interesting way, because if you go to them and say GBV, they'll just like, maybe roll their eyes and stuff. But if you start looking at it like how the psychologist was saying that, talk about it from a personality point of view, make it sound really, fancy and, interesting to them, then we'll probably
Then
will get
maybe
a
they'll
better
listen.
response. Yes.
Yes.
And also just to add, I'm quite excited to hear that there is this need of, okay, so what do we do? What do the ladies do when, or whoever's in this situation, what do they do to economize? And that's where the Hopeful Hearts Farm is coming in, to try and create these little sub business units from farm to fork, where you can come and you can say, okay, like I take interest in starting the food garden. I take interest in processing. Let's get agro processing. Let's get dehydrators in, and moving and stuff. And you can see where the ladies can take in. Or otherwise, maybe
Yes.
they just want to come and to have a walk and have a proper conversation with somebody. So if different sectors can have those sort of setups, then that can also help to generate income and self-funding, sort of thing, because now you've got like a little sub-business unit happening within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you.
I want to comment on what she said.
Okay. Yes.
Can I?
Go for
Okay. So talking about leadership, and I think when we did our research, we could not go into a boardroom and speak to the CEO about gender-based violence, because he just got that funny look over his eyes, and then he looked at his phone. He didn't actually engage at all. So we had to change our language. Talking about what you were saying, we were saying gender equality, okay? Because the risk if you don't do it, and talking about money, because that's what we as Shared Value Africa,
Yes.
we advocate for profit with purpose. We're not saying that companies can't make money, but it's how you make your money and how do you affect the communities in which you operate. So the profit with purpose is where leadership have to have that mindset. And there are some of them, I know they're few and far between, but there are some of them that are focused on that profit with purpose, which is what Gavin was saying. How do we shift the mindsets? How do we shift those mindsets? So for me, it starts with leadership. And that's the mindsets we have to shift. Because if we can take our president to be an example, to actually, when he stands up and he talks, that he actually makes sense. I'm sorry, I'm saying this with the greatest amount of respect, but I want him to stand up and actually, when he talks about gender-based violence, to really speak from the heart. But that's what we need, because we need those male voices. And the male voice, like a Gavin and you, have to actually influence those around you. Because the thing is, if we don't do that, we are going to be here in 5 years' time and sit in the same position that we're in.
Absolutely. So we have enough time for each of the panelists to say something in terms of in conclusion. And my invitation is, if you can, in what you're sharing, is possibly find some inspiration or hope, because what we have spoken about today can be very heavy. But you must have something that we can be inspired by, or that we can hope and hold on to. So can we start with you?
We can. I just wanted to say again to the birthday girl, I've been thinking, how can we help you? And you need to know also that universities, you might not qualify for legal aid, but universities have legal aid clinics. And I don't think you need to qualify financially. So perhaps you can approach your universities, the legal aid clinics, to see if they can help you. And as far as men are concerned, I'm also very lucky to work with an organization. They are called, they are actually in KwaZulu Natal. And now their name is escaping me. The Good Men Foundation. They do incredible work. They focus on men. And we need more. We need one person can make a difference.
Yes.
One person, if you make a difference, often people say, you do so much and you do this and you're a lawyer and you're this and you're that. You don't have to have an education or anything. Look at what that community did. Now, do they have an education? They did the right thing because they know that's what we need. We need individuals to stand up. And that's the only way we can make a difference. And yeah.
Thank you. Corné.
Yes, well, I think, like I say, we're not seeing a change in the numbers, but we've seen a lot of positive stuff happening. I mean, Tiki has worked tirelessly we participated in some of that of developing a gender equality workbook that people can just start self-assessing, that they can create awareness. And we can't say it's directly linked, but we've had a GBV F1 Fund symposium happening in May that there are private sector companies beginning to talk. We're not seeing, but we're seeing progress. It's like it's ready here for us to move in, to keep on doing our work. We're not there yet, but we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere in terms of raising awareness, creating participation. And we still got a way to go until we see outcome, but we can never give up. We can never stop doing this. So let's just continue doing it and doing it better and funding tears.
Courtney.
Well, I think obviously in closing, there's a lot that I want, to empower the youth and to get more people out there because I know a lot of my peers, like, everyone's scared. Everyone's scared to speak out about it because it's like no one's gonna listen to me. Like just I'm just a matric, like what am I gonna do? And I feel like that's so important that any small thing you can do is still something. It's better than just sitting and watching and saying, oh, shame, like I feel bad. And even if it's like, I do it a lot, even posting on Instagram, just posting a story that says 16 days, because so many people don't even know what that is, or Happy Women's Day, or all those small things to just make people talk about it. Because if we don't talk about it, you're not going to go anywhere. And even if it's a baby step, without getting it out there and kind of disrupting things a little bit, nothing's going to improve because we're all in our comfort zones that we don't want to challenge ourselves, and you have to if we want to see progress.
Thank you.
So I want to say to Courtney, you've taken my words because be the change. We
Yes.
have to be the change. And how do we make that change? Like speak up. We have to speak up. We've got to support each other. And we've got to go and shift those mindsets to get that funding that we need. But I think I want to agree with Corne. I think even Mara, would we have sat here 10 years ago? No. So we've made progress. I just want to say, let's not be negative, okay? Because we have made some progress. We're here today talking about it.
Yeah.
I could never, 10 years ago, we never spoke about it.
Yeah.
We swept it under the carpet and then eventually we fell over that heap that was there, but we kept quiet. So it's things are changing, but we need to drive it all the time and never give up, as Corne said. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panel. Thank you to the participation from everybody in the audience. And now I hand back to our MC.
Awesome. I did promise that it is going to be a fire-filled activity of a day, and that our panelists are really, really experts, and they're going to get us really engaging. And as I was just sitting down and recounting everything that was said, I'm just like, how do I encapsulate everything that has been said here today by our panelists and the contribution that we've had, so that you were able to summarize it in a tweet? I was thinking around what is my Sunday Times headline for the conversation that we had. I mean, I haven't found one. If anyone can help me throughout the day, if we can just summarize our summit today in a tweet or give me the Sunday Times headline, I promise you I might just give you a lipstick. I might ask that guy who came in earlier from Avon to give you a lipstick or something. But in all honesty, I think that the real conversation here today really has been around the pathways of the intersections of business, society, and politics. And how do we connect those three dots and create pathways into communities and dealing with this particular issue? I don't think that there could ever be one pathway, and that's why I say it's pathways into intersecting business, society, and politics in the fight against GBV, and particularly becoming victim-centered. And lastly, what was interesting for me that came up, which is ringing at the back of my head, and I have to find time to really go into it, is this inherent nature of leadership and its masculinity, and finding a way to dismantle it, or at least bring in pathways around bringing in, whether it's feminine energy meeting masculine energy together, so that we're able to really find a synergy of it living together. Because I don't think that it's one or the other, it's the two living together. And so, how do we make sure that there's enough energy of both, and there's not dominance of the other over the other? Whether it's in corporate, in the household, in communities, or just the relationships that we have, how do we balance both of these energies in the world, in the way in which we lead ourselves and lead our families, our communities, our workplaces, and so on? And so that's, I think, a big challenge that our panelists left with me, and I hope it's a challenge they left with you, to constantly think about how do you balance the masculine energy in the world of leadership. And leadership doesn't necessarily mean because you've got the authority or the rule or the role, in really how we conduct and organize ourselves as society in the best way. So I'm no expert, yeah.
Gender-based violence is systemic. You are part of the system.
All right. Okay. We're now waiting for the headline, the Sunday Times. It's coming. I need to ask that guy. We need to find the Sunday Times headline now. I don't want to keep us here any longer than we should, because now we're going into the good parts. We have lunch coming up. And please make sure you don't get itis, because we still have a jam-packed day, so you can't be falling asleep after the wonderful lunch you're going to have. I'm going to try and keep you awake. We're going to have a lunch. It's an hour that we've got for lunch outside. Your network, have a conversation. Hopefully, we can find the Sunday Times headline during that period. And when we come back, we've got a very interesting and section around the training, empowering change, effective survivor support. So I think that we're going into the meat of why we're here today. Remember, we said it is about the survivor at the heart of our summit. So when we come back, we really are going to talk and dive into how do we support the survivor in all the walks of life. I guess in our three buckets: business, society, and politics, and finding the pathways into that. So enjoy lunch. Don't fall asleep when we come back. Okay. Cool.